I first met Eleanor, Ellie, as I called her, back in ninth grade. We started dating not long after, and by the time we hit sophomore year, everyone knew us as a couple. We didn't have any real issues during high school, and in a move straight out of every high school romance cliché, we decided to share our first time on prom night. That night opened up a new level of intimacy for us, and from then on, we seized every chance to be together like that. By junior year, we were already talking about marriage. The plan was to wait until we both finished college before making it official. But college, well, it changed Ellie in ways I didn't see coming. In high school, everyone respected our relationship. Guys stayed clear of Ellie because they knew she was mine. Once we got to college, though, everything shifted. Sure, there were a few familiar faces from high school, but most of the student body was new. To them, Ellie wasn't taken. She was just a pretty girl on campus, and the attention from other guys was constant. I knew what was happening, but what could I do? Our schedules barely lined up. We had different classes, and I worked evenings. So our time together was limited to nights when we were both free. The attention from other guys started to change Ellie. She became more outgoing, more flirtatious. I'd often see her laughing and chatting with other guys, sometimes catching her from across the quad, where she never noticed me watching. A couple of times, while cutting through the student union, I spotted her in the cafeteria with another guy. Once, she was sitting with two of them. It didn't hit me until much later that I never saw her hanging out with other girls. It was always guys. At the time, I didn't think much of it. We were in love, planning our future together, so I trusted her completely. She was mine. After all, every night we spent together was proof of that, or so I thought. Ellie was gorgeous, and I figured the attention from guys was just something we had to deal with. After all, we had years of history, and she always came home to me. Fast forward to after college. We both landed jobs, got married, and started what I thought was a picture-perfect life. For nearly 6 years, I lived in a bubble of marital contentment. Then, out of nowhere, everything unraveled. It started on a Thursday afternoon at work. Sophie from the mailroom dropped off a stack of files, one of which wasn't even meant for me. It was part of an account managed by Danny Preston, an old buddy from high school and college. As I skimmed the file, I noticed a massive error in the numbers, off by nearly $3 million. I was grabbing my calculator when Danny came rushing into my office, desperate for the file. He had a presentation for Apex and needed it fixed ASAP. I showed him the mistake, and he looked like he might pass out. He thanked me profusely, grabbed the file, and bolted to correct the numbers in time. That evening, like every Thursday, Ellie was working late on payroll for Friday's checks. My routine was simple: stop by Bud's bar for a burger and a couple of beers before heading home. I was halfway through my second beer when Danny walked in, spotted me, and slid into my booth. He ordered a drink and told the waitress to put my tab on his, saying it was his way of thanking me for saving his butt earlier. We chatted about work and caught up on old acquaintances. Then, out of nowhere, Danny asked why I put up with Ellie's behavior. The question hit me like a slap in the face. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. He hesitated but kept pushing, asking why I let her get away with it. My confusion must have been obvious because he quickly realized I had no clue what he was insinuating. He tried to backtrack and leave, but I stopped him, demanding he explain. He looked at me with a mix of pity and regret before sitting back down. What came next shook me to my core. Danny revealed that Ellie had a reputation, a bad one, and that it went all the way back to high school. He admitted that he himself had been involved with her. Stunned, I demanded he tell me everything, no matter how painful or ugly. Danny's story poured out like a flood. Just weeks after our senior prom, he walked into his cousin Henry's house and found Ellie there, with Henry. They saw him, didn't seem to care, and before long, Danny was part of it. They took turns with her until she finally said she had to clean up and meet me after my shift at Jessup's Market. That wasn't the only time. Whenever I was at work, Ellie and Danny would hook up. Later, when Henry got serious with someone else, Ellie stuck with Danny, until he caught her with two other guys, James Carter and Brian Harris. Even then, instead of walking away, Danny joined in. This pattern continued through high school and into college. Hearing all of this, I sat there frozen, unable to process what he was saying. For over 10 years, this had been going on, right under my nose. Danny tried to justify it, claiming we weren't that close of friends back then, and he didn't think my relationship with Ellie was serious. But his excuses didn't matter. All I could think about was how blind I'd been and how long I'd lived in ignorance. During Ellie's first semester of freshman year, her schedule was pretty predictable. She had classes Monday through Thursday and Tuesday through Friday, with no classes on Wednesdays. Her last lecture each day wrapped up around 1 or 2 in the afternoon. I can't remember exactly. Meanwhile, I'd finish my own classes and head straight to work. But while I was busy punching the clock, Ellie had a very different agenda. Instead of heading home, she was heading to someone's bedroom. Wednesdays, in particular, turned into full-blown, all-day affairs that carried on throughout our college years. Sure, her class schedule shifted from semester to semester, but one thing stayed the same. Ellie's extracurricular activities picked up right where her classes left off. I don't mean to make it sound like this happened every single day, but 2 or 3 times a week was common enough. Honestly, most people were surprised when Ellie and I tied the knot. They assumed I had to know about her behavior. Hell, some even thought I was okay with it, that maybe I got some weird thrill out of it. Kevin even speculated that Ellie and I were swingers, though nobody ever saw me with another woman. Ellie, on the other hand, was constantly seen with other guys. Hearing this from Danny left me gutted. I had been completely clueless. Danny hesitated, then said, "Rob, if you didn't know about this, there's probably more you don't know. Like her Thursday night dates with Tom and Dan Mitchell, or her Tuesdays with Luke Anderson while you're at the bowling alley. And honestly, I'm not even sure who else she's seeing or when. But if you're busy with something, chances are Ellie's busy with someone." Danny insisted that, for what it was worth, he stopped fooling around with her after we got married. "A single woman's one thing," he said, "but a married woman? That's a whole different story." By this point, I didn't even know what to say. My mind was spinning. But one thing was clear. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I finished my beer, stood up, and thanked Danny for the drink and, in a bitter twist, for giving me some clarity. The drive home was a blur. My head was full of questions. Should I believe him? On one hand, I couldn't imagine Ellie betraying me. She loved me, didn't she? But on the other hand, why would Danny lie? He knew I could verify his story. If he were lying, we couldn't continue working together, and he had to know that. Still, the idea of working with him after hearing all this felt unbearable. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Back when we were teenagers, hormones ruled the day. If some other guy's girlfriend had made an offer, and I wasn't with Ellie, I might have taken it too. But this wasn't about a teenage fling. This was 10 years of betrayal. 10 years of living a lie. When I got home, Ellie was already back from finishing payroll. She reached out to me in bed, her hand brushing my shoulder, but the touch made my skin crawl. For the first time, I didn't feel anything. No desire, no connection. I pretended to be asleep, refusing to engage. The next morning, I was up before her, brewing coffee and reading the paper like nothing was wrong. When she asked why I'd gone to bed so early, I brushed it off, saying I hadn't felt well. "Must have been something I ate," I told her. She just smiled and said, "Well, you owe me double tonight." At work, I wasted no time. I called Victor Hayes, an old high school friend who'd become a corporate lawyer. I asked if he could recommend a no-nonsense divorce attorney. His response said it all. "Rob," he said, "if you're asking me this, I guess you've finally found out." I confirmed his suspicion, telling him I'd only just learned the truth about Ellie. After a pause, Victor recommended Jack Morris and told me to mention his name. I called Morris immediately and set up a meeting for that afternoon. By 1 o'clock, I was sitting in his office. Morris laid out my options, ranging from an amicable split to an all-out scorched earth approach. Since we weren't in a no-fault divorce state, I needed solid evidence of Ellie's infidelity. Hearsay wouldn't cut it. When I asked how to get the proof, Morris handed me a card for Simon Clark, a private investigator whose office was just across the street. Morris offered to call Clark and see if he could meet me right away. I agreed, telling him I wanted this resolved as quickly as possible. I also instructed Morris to begin the divorce paperwork, promising to deliver the evidence once I had it. Within 10 minutes, I was in Clark's office, laying out the situation. He outlined a plan but warned me that it would require acting completely normal around Ellie. She can't suspect a thing, he said. As unpleasant as it might be, you need to keep up appearances. Every fiber of my being rebelled against the idea, but I knew he was right. For now, I had to keep living the lie, even as the truth started to unravel everything I thought I knew. Clark had been brutally clear. If your usual routine involves being intimate with your wife 3 or 4 times a week, you have to stick to that schedule. Whether you're the one initiating or just going along with it, keep everything the same. The key is to avoid raising her suspicions. As much as it disgusted me, I understood the logic. Clark put it bluntly, this isn't about love or connection anymore. It's about maintaining her trust and ensuring she doesn't see the cracks in the facade. I headed back to my office after that conversation, nerves on edge. Picking up the phone, I called Ellie. Our routines had always been a core part of our relationship, or at least, I thought so. Friday night dinners and Sunday morning breakfasts were staples for us, so I suggested a place for dinner that night. She agreed, her voice as chipper as ever, and I hated how natural she sounded, as if nothing was wrong. Later that evening, as I dug into my veal marsala and Ellie sipped white wine over her rigatoni, I forced myself to act normal. Across town, Clark's team was hard at work. Discreetly and efficiently, they were installing wireless cameras and listening devices throughout our home. I didn't like the idea of strangers poking through my life, but I liked being played for a fool even less. As I sipped my Merlot, I replayed Clark's advice in my head. You're going to want to check for the cameras, he'd said. It's a natural reaction. But don't. If she catches you looking, all of this will be for nothing. His voice had carried a note of warning. In the bedroom, you'll have to act natural. Pretend the cameras don't exist, even if the thought of it makes your skin crawl. The system is motion activated, so yes, someone might see you. But this isn't about comfort. It's about getting the truth. I nodded along at dinner, even smiling at Ellie's jokes, though inside, I felt like a boiling pot about to spill over. After dinner, I suggested we go out for drinks or dancing. Maybe I wanted to delay going home. Maybe I just wanted to throw her off balance. She declined, of course, insisting we head home. You owe me for last night, she teased, giving me a sly smile. On the drive back, she slid closer, unzipping my pants with practiced ease. Drive careful, sweetie, she whispered. Wouldn't want to bite off something important. I clenched the steering wheel tighter, trying to keep my emotions in check. The way she acted, so casual and confident, only fueled my anger. This wasn't special. It wasn't intimate. It was just another move she'd probably perfected with every man she'd been with over the last decade. Still, my body betrayed me, responding despite my disgust. When we pulled into the driveway, Ellie wasted no time, practically dragging me to the bedroom. I wanted to follow Clark's instructions, to act like everything was normal, but I couldn't. The thought of hidden cameras recording every move, of someone watching us, was too much. So, I turned off the system. I left my phone on the car seat as a reminder to turn it back on when I left the house. That night wasn't about love. It wasn't even about lust. It was just going through the motions. Unfortunately for me, once wasn't enough for Ellie. She demanded more, and I begrudgingly complied twice before she finally let me sleep. The whole time, I felt like I was performing in a grim play, each act worse than the last. The next morning, I was up before her, lacing up my running shoes. Ellie wandered into the kitchen, casually mentioning she wouldn't be home when I got back. Hair appointment, she said. It's a long one, 9 to 2. I usually gossip with the girls and grab lunch after. She smiled like it was the most natural thing in the world. Maybe it was the truth. But given what I now knew, I doubted it. More likely, she had plans with one of her flings, squeezing him in before or after her appointment. Before heading out, I flipped the system back on. I doubted anything would happen while I was out running, but Clark had stressed the importance of consistency. Habits, he'd said, were crucial. The switch deactivated the cameras but left the listening devices and phone tap operational. When I got back from my usual 5-mile run, I headed straight to the basement. Above my workbench, hidden in a cabinet, were the recorders Clark's team had set up. One handled audio from the listening devices and phone tap. The other recorded video from the cameras. My hands shook as I pressed play. The first thing I heard was her voice. "Hello?" she said, her tone sweet and familiar. "Good morning, lover. We still on for today?" The man's voice was casual, confident. "You bet," she replied. "The wife took the kids to the zoo, so we've got until 6. "I can't stay that long," she said. "I have to be home by 2. Rob's already asking why I'm out so late." "Then skip the hair appointment and come over now," he suggested. "And what do I tell Rob when my hair isn't done?" she countered, exasperated. "I don't know, baby. Make something up. I just want more time with you." That's when I recognized the man's voice. It was my cousin Jake. My stomach churned. How many others? How many people I knew, people I trusted, had been part of this betrayal? By the time Ellie returned from her so-called hair appointment, I'd managed to calm myself enough to play the part. I even faked a fall down the basement stairs, claiming I'd hurt my back. "Must have pulled a muscle," I said. It was the perfect excuse to avoid any physical contact for a few days. On Monday, I called Ellie at work, telling her I'd be leaving town the next day and wouldn't be back until Friday. Of course, there was no trip. I just needed time to let the cameras do their job. Ellie always stayed home during my business trips and my nightly calls, always at random times, ensured she was there. If she was cheating, and if she had the audacity to do it in our bed, I was counting on the cameras to capture it. That would be the irrefutable proof I needed. That evening, Ellie leaned into me, wrapping her arms around my neck. "I need something to hold me over while you're gone," she murmured, her tone dripping with faux affection. My injured back gave me the perfect out. "Sorry," I said. "Still too sore." She seemed disappointed, but I didn't care. I was already playing the long game, and her manipulations were just noise in the background of my growing resolve. On Tuesday morning, Ellie kissed me goodbye at the front door, her usual affectionate farewell accompanied by a suitcase in hand. She believed I was heading off on a 3-day business trip, blissfully unaware of my true plans. After leaving the house, I drove to work and managed to put in nearly a full day before leaving at 3 p.m. My stomach churned with a mix of dread and determination as I drove back to our neighborhood. Parking a block away from the house, I opened my laptop, entered the code Clark had provided, and activated the surveillance software. With a few keystrokes, I was listening to the phone line recorder. The first call came through almost immediately. "Hello?" Ellie's voice, cheerful as always. "Hey, handsome honk, it's me," she said to whoever was on the other end. "What's up?" "Hubby just left on a 3-day trip," she added casually. "You ready to spend 3 fun-filled nights with me?" "Does a duck walk barefoot on the beach?" the man replied with a laugh. "I'll take that as a yes," Ellie said, giggling. "I'll leave it to you to call Ryan. I've got to get out of here and get to work. I'll be home by 6. See you then." Her tone was light and playful, and it sickened me. I shut the laptop, disgusted but resolute. Picking up my phone, I called Jack Morris, my attorney, and instructed him to have the divorce papers ready to serve by Thursday. I laid out specific instructions for how I wanted them delivered. Morris mentioned that my method would cost more than the standard service, but I told him I didn't care. Whatever it took to ensure this moment would be etched in her memory, I was willing to pay. Leaving the neighborhood, I drove across town and checked into a modest motel with a restaurant and bar next door. For the next 3 days, this would be my base. I liked the bar immediately, a relaxed country western place with a jukebox loaded with classic tunes. Every night, a few unattached women seemed determined not to let a man sit alone while the music played. The first night, as I sipped a long neck at the bar, a stunning redhead approached me. "Come on, sugar," she said with a playful grin. "They're playing our song." She grabbed my hand, pulling me onto the dance floor before I could protest. As we moved to the music, she glanced up at me. "Don't get the wrong idea, sugar. I'm not looking for anything. I just love to dance, and you were sitting there." Her name was Megan, and after the dance, she invited me to join her and her friends, Claire and Emma, at their table. I spent the evening taking turns dancing with them, laughing and forgetting, if only briefly, about the mess my life had become. Around 10:30, I called it a night, and as I stood to leave, Megan smiled. "Maybe we'll see you again," she said. "We're here 2 or 3 nights a week." I'm just next door at the motel, I replied. So there's a good chance I'll be back. For the first time since my conversation with Danny, I went to bed feeling almost positive. The next afternoon, around 3 p.m., I parked a block from the house again and opened the laptop to review the footage from the previous night. Two men, both notably younger than Ellie, by at least 6 years, had joined her in the bedroom. I couldn't help but wonder if she was chasing some fantasy of youthful vigor and excitement. The video itself was unremarkable, a straightforward recording of their activities. What intrigued me more was the audio. I had half expected her to mock me or compare me unfavorably to her companions, but she didn't. Instead, the only acknowledgement of me came when one of the men expressed a desire to meet more often. Ellie quickly shot it down, saying, "Rob comes first. I can't just disappear whenever I want." It wasn't comforting. It felt more like a practical admission than any sign of loyalty. On Wednesday, the pattern repeated itself. The same two men left the house at precisely 6 a.m., just as Ellie had instructed them. She emphasized the importance of avoiding the neighbors, though she seemed confident that no one in the area was an early riser. I called my attorney that afternoon and asked him to delay serving the papers until Friday at 5:45 p.m. If Friday morning followed the same pattern, the timing would be perfect. Sure enough, on Friday morning, I parked down the street at 5:55 a.m. At exactly 6 a.m., the front door opened, and the two men stepped outside. They turned to say goodbye to Ellie, who stood in the doorway, smiling. That's when they saw the process server step into view. He handed the papers directly to Ellie, said a polite, "You've been served," and walked away without a backward glance. Ellie and her companions stood frozen, staring after him. I pulled up in front of the house, honked the horn to get Ellie's attention, and gave her a cheerful wave before driving off. She looked stunned, her face pale as she clutched the papers. I had made my point. Inside the envelope was a letter from me, explaining that I never wanted to speak to her again unless it was through our attorneys. I didn't want to hear her excuses or declarations of love. I didn't want her to claim it was meaningless or try to convince me we could work through it. The letter made it clear. No contact, no explanations, no reconciliation. Of course, Ellie ignored the letter. Within 15 minutes of leaving, my phone rang. It was her. I let it go to voicemail, along with the next 7 calls. When I got to work, I informed my secretary, Nancy, about the situation. "Don't put through any calls from Ellie," I told her. "And if she shows up, tell her I'm not here. Say I'm meeting with a client." Nancy nodded, but a few minutes later, she popped her head back in. "I talked to Vera at the front desk," she said. "If your wife comes, she'll call me so you can sneak out the side door. You can wait at the cafe until she leaves." I thanked her, grateful for her loyalty. A good secretary really is priceless. By the end of the day, Ellie had called me 17 times. Each call went unanswered. During lunch, I called my dad and brother to update them on the situation. I asked Dad to let Mom know, but made it clear I didn't want her trying to convince me to reconcile. "That's going to be tough," Dad said. "She thinks of Ellie as the daughter she never had." "I don't care," I replied. "This is my decision." When the workday ended, I stayed in my office, finishing up some pending tasks. There was no reason to rush home anymore. For the first time in years, I had nowhere else I needed to be. Before leaving work on Friday, Nancy stopped by my office to update me. "By the way," she said, "your wife called 5 times this morning. Each time, I told her I had instructions not to put her through to you. I think she's finally gotten the message. She hasn't called since noon." I thanked her and finished my workday around 7 p.m. Heading down to the lobby, I noticed Vera was gone, but Frank, the night watchman, greeted me with his usual friendly demeanor. "Hot date with the missus tonight," he teased. I shook my head and clarified, "No, Frank. We're getting a divorce, and she's waiting outside to talk. I don't want to." Frank's face fell into a look of understanding. "Ah, been there," he replied, revealing he'd gone through 2 divorces himself. I instructed him not to open the door if Ellie knocked or used the intercom. I also told him to explain that he was the only one in the building if she asked. To cover my tracks further, I claimed my car was in the lot due to a breakdown and a tow truck would arrive in the morning. "Got it," Frank said with a nod. "Don't worry, I'll handle it." Satisfied, I exited through the back door, circling the block and crossing the street to slip into Dave's diner. I chose a seat near the window, where I could observe Ellie waiting by my car. I ordered the dinner special and watched as she stood outside, looking frustrated and uncertain. Halfway through my dessert, she approached the building and pressed the intercom button. Frank must have delivered my message because she returned to her car moments later and drove off. I finished my meal, lingered over another cup of coffee, and then made my way to the bar for a couple of beers. Though the place was busy with several women hoping to find a dance partner, I wasn't in the mood. After 2 beers, I called it a night. Saturday morning was busy as I scrambled to handle tasks I should have addressed before serving Ellie the divorce papers. I just hoped I wasn't too late and that she hadn't acted on anything I'd neglected. My first stop was the bank, where I emptied all our joint accounts and retrieved my personal documents and certificates of deposit from the safe deposit box. I left Ellie's belongings untouched, placing my wedding ring inside for her to find later. Next, I had breakfast at the Waffle House and used the time to cancel our joint credit cards. I kept a Visa and an American Express in my name, while leaving Ellie's 2 individual cards alone. This ensured she couldn't rack up debt on our shared accounts. Afterward, I returned to the motel, parked my car, and took a cab to the nearest Avis rental location. I rented the cheapest car they had, returned to the motel, and spent the afternoon lounging by the pool with a book. My phone remained off, but when I turned it on just before dinner, I found 9 missed messages from Ellie. I deleted them all and powered the phone back off. That evening, I headed to the bar, which featured a live band on weekends. The place was packed, and I barely managed to find a seat at the bar. As I sipped my beer, I felt a gentle tug on my shirt. Turning, I saw Megan standing behind me, her red hair glowing in the dim light. "Hey, cowboy," she said with a grin. "Why are you sitting here when there's a seat waiting for you at our table?" I chuckled. If I'd seen you, I wouldn't have dared intrude. Didn't want to assume. "Nonsense," she replied, grabbing my arm. "Come on." I followed her to the table, where Claire and Emma greeted me warmly. After sitting down, I looked around and commented, "There's something wrong with this picture. 3 beautiful women sitting here alone, and no guys swarming you." Megan laughed. "Oh, we get plenty of attention, but it's usually from idiots. They see the wedding rings and assume we're here to cheat. Most of them don't understand we're just here to dance." Claire chimed in, "The decent ones, like you, are a rare breed. That's why you've got an open invitation to join us anytime." I hesitated before asking, "It's not really my business, but why are 3 gorgeous married women spending time in a place like this without your husbands?" Megan nodded thoughtfully. "Fair question. Claire's husband is in the Army Reserve, and his unit was sent to Afghanistan. She was going stir-crazy at home, so Emma and I decided to get her out. Emma's husband works afternoons, and my husband's a long-haul trucker who's gone for weeks at a time. So, we stick together. We love to dance, and this is our escape." "What about you?" Claire asked, glancing at my hand. "You had a ring last time we saw you, and now it's gone." I explained briefly. "I handed my wife divorce papers yesterday and left the ring where she'd find it." Megan raised an eyebrow. "Does that mean you're free to pursue something new?" "Not at all," I replied firmly. "The grounds were infidelity, and I won't do anything that could give her leverage in a countersuit." Claire smiled. "Fair enough. But we've got a reliable dance partner now." The rest of the night flew by as we danced until closing. Occasionally, other men joined us, but the 3 women made it clear they preferred my company. On Sunday, I spent a quiet day by the pool, finishing my book and enjoying the peace. By Monday, I hoped Ellie would assume I was still out of town. I returned the rental car and drove my own vehicle to work, but that proved to be a mistake. When I left the building at the end of the day, Ellie was waiting by my car. She stepped forward as I approached, positioning herself near the driver's side door. "We need to talk," she said firmly. I didn't respond. I simply walked past her, opened my car door, and drove off without a word. As I approached my car, Ellie stepped in front of the driver's side door, blocking my way. Her eyes were desperate, and her voice trembled as she insisted I let her explain. I had no intention of engaging in another round of her manipulative games. Gently but firmly, I pushed her aside, causing her to stumble briefly before regaining her balance. I rolled down the car window and spoke with as much calm as I could muster. You need to read the letter that came with the divorce papers, I said evenly. I'm not going to talk to you without my attorney present, and any conversation we have will only concern the divorce. Ellie's face twisted with frustration. I don't want a divorce. I don't want to lose you, she exclaimed. I love you. I need you. Her words rang hollow to me. I shook my head. It's over, Ellie, I replied. You need to accept that. I'm not changing my mind. Rolling up the window, I drove away, leaving her standing there, stunned and silent. I told myself that this was a step forward, a necessary boundary to enforce. But Ellie's refusal to accept my decision became painfully clear the following evening. On Tuesday, as I was leaving work, 2 men approached me in the parking lot. My stomach churned when I recognized them. They were the same 2 guys who had been with Ellie in our bedroom. One grabbed my left arm, the other my right. Don't resist, one of them said, his tone menacing but controlled. Ellie wants to talk to you, and since you're being difficult, we're taking you to her. My first instinct was to fight back. These guys looked tough, but they were only a few years younger than me, and they clearly underestimated me in my suit and tie. If I could catch them off guard, I could make enough of a scene to draw attention and foil whatever plan they had. But then I hesitated. Was this the best course of action? If Ellie was desperate enough to orchestrate an ambush like this, what would she try next if I sent these 2 back to her battered and bruised? They shoved me into my car and slid in beside me, sandwiching me between them. Drive, one of them ordered. I didn't argue. We arrived at the house shortly after, and they escorted me inside. Ellie was waiting, her expression a mix of triumph and determination. Sit him in the chair, she instructed. The 2 men complied, forcing me into the seat and holding me down as I attempted to stand. Don't even think about it, one of them warned. Ellie crossed her arms and stared at me. We're not getting a divorce, she announced, her tone defiant. I'm not letting you go. I love you. You have a strange way of showing it, I muttered, glaring at her. She ignored me, pressing on with her prepared speech. There's something you need to understand, she said. I've been dealing with a medical issue, nymphomania, since high school. Ever since that night at prom, when you took my purity, I've had these needs. I scoffed. Ellie, there are medications for that. You could have sought treatment instead of lying and cheating for over a decade. She shook her head. I've tried the medications, she insisted. They don't work for me. They make me feel like a zombie, sluggish and dull. I can't live like that. Her voice softened as she leaned closer. Rob, I love you. I've always loved you. I've never wanted anyone else like I want you. But I have to meet my needs, and you can't keep up. That doesn't make you less of a man. You're a fantastic lover, but I need more than any one person can provide. I sat in stunned silence as she outlined her plan. I've drafted a post-nuptial agreement, she explained. It allows me to have as many lovers as necessary to maintain my mental health. If you find it unacceptable, you can leave the marriage with nothing. But I think we can make this work. She handed me a pen and gestured toward the document. Sign it, she said. I stared at her, incredulous. You're out of your mind, Ellie, I said, my voice low and steady. Do you really think I'm going to agree to this? Her 2 associates loomed closer, their presence a clear warning. I decided to play along, rising from the chair under their watchful eyes. Placing my briefcase on the table, I picked up the document and began to read. It was as absurd as she had described, filled with terms that stripped me of dignity and autonomy. When I finished, I laughed bitterly. This is a joke, I said, tearing the papers in half and tossing the pieces at her feet. I'm not signing this. I turned to leave, but her associates moved to block my path. Stop him, Ellie screamed. The first guy lunged toward me, but I swung my briefcase hard, catching him squarely on the head. He crumpled to the floor. The second guy hesitated, and I took advantage of his uncertainty, delivering a sharp punch to his jaw. He staggered back, and I followed up with a swift kick to his groin. He dropped to the ground, groaning in pain. Without another word, I grabbed my briefcase and strode out the door, my heart pounding. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but I was done playing by Ellie's rules. Understanding the need to keep them subdued in a 2-against-1 scenario, I maintained my assault on Eric and Ryan, alternating between kicks to sensitive areas and punches to their ribs and heads. I made sure neither had the chance to regain their footing. Each strike was calculated, fueled by the anger and frustration that had been building inside me for weeks. Suddenly, Ellie's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and panicked. "Stop, or I'll shoot," she screamed. My head snapped toward her, and I saw her standing there, weapon in hand, aiming it directly at me. For a brief moment, I hesitated, my fists clenched and heart racing. Defiantly, I straightened up and met her gaze. "Go ahead. Shoot," I said, my voice cold and steady. Ignoring her threat, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, I calmly provided my name, address, and a brief summary of the situation. "My wife is armed and threatening to shoot me," I explained. The operator urged me to remain calm and avoid provoking her, assuring me that help was on the way. After ending the call, I looked at Ellie, my expression dripping with sarcasm. "Thanks, Eleanor. I'm sure your trip to jail will really speed up this divorce." Her face twisted with anger. "You're an idiot," she spat. "When the cops get here, they'll arrest you. You came into my house and attacked my friends out of jealousy. They'll believe me. It's your word against ours." I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, Ellie, you're as delusional as ever. Do you think Frank and Ruth, who saw your goons drag me out of work, won't testify against you? Or that they'll forget how I tried to leave and you pulled a gun on me?" I leaned in slightly, locking eyes with her. "You might fool the cops for a night, but once the witnesses testify and the evidence is reviewed, you'll be the one behind bars. And trust me, I'm not bailing you out." She ignored my warnings and launched into a tirade of fabricated accusations, clearly rehearsed between her and her associates. When the police arrived, I found myself in handcuffs, taken into custody while Ellie smirked smugly behind them. It was infuriating, but I knew this was just the beginning of her downfall. The next morning from my holding cell, I called Jack Morris. I explained the situation, emphasizing the role Eric and Ryan played in restraining me and Ellie's use of the weapon. Jack wasted no time. He contacted Simon Clark to gather the surveillance evidence we had already collected and shared it with a friend who worked as an assistant district attorney. The tapes were damning. They showed Eric and Ryan holding me down while Ellie brandished the weapon, shouting threats. Even worse for her case, the audio caught Ellie admitting her plan to lie to the police and have her accomplices do the same. By Monday morning, during my bail hearing, Ellie walked into the courthouse, ready to gloat, only to be arrested on the spot. By nightfall, warrants were issued for Eric and Ryan, and they were both behind bars. As for Ellie, I refused to post her bail, and when her parents couldn't scrape together the money, she remained locked up. A lawyer she hired contacted me, suggesting I use the house as collateral for her bond. I hung up without a word. Returning to the motel, I decided it was time to reclaim my home. I checked out, moved back in, and promptly had all the locks changed. Jack also secured a restraining order against Ellie, ensuring she couldn't come within 1,000 feet of me without risking immediate arrest. While part of me felt some lingering sadness, the reality of what she had done made reconciliation unthinkable. Eric and Ryan quickly turned on Ellie, accepting plea deals in exchange for their cooperation. They painted her as the mastermind, describing how she had orchestrated the entire plan. Ellie, for her part, claimed she never intended to shoot me. "I just wanted to stop him from hurting Eric or Ryan," she told the jury. Her emotional plea and expressions of love for me convinced the jury to acquit her of felony menacing, but they still found her guilty of unlawful restraint, filing a false police report, and other lesser charges. The judge sentenced her to 9 months in county jail and 1,000 hours of community service. While she served her time, our divorce proceeded without a hitch. Aside from losing Ellie, the only concession I made was transferring 20% of the house's equity to her bank account. It was a small price to pay for freedom. With everything settled, I decided to celebrate. I returned to the bar next to the motel where I'd stayed, hoping to mark the start of my new life. To my surprise, Megan and Emma were there, their laughter carrying over the crowd. Claire wasn't with them. Her husband had returned from deployment, and they were busy reconnecting. When I approached their table, Megan smiled and asked, "Why celebrate with us?" Taking a deep breath, I grinned. "Well, I'm taking a wild guess here. Claire and Emma are married, but Megan, you're not wearing a ring or showing any signs you've ever worn one. That tells me there's no long-haul trucker in your life. Plus, I've always had a thing for gorgeous redheads." Emma chuckled, nudging Megan. "Girl, you're busted." Megan laughed, her cheeks turning pink. "Well, cowboy, you've got me figured out," she said as I held out my hand. She took it, and I led her onto the dance floor, the music carrying us into the night. For the first time in years, I felt like I was moving forward, away from the pain and towards something new.